Just say it, man. Don't make me ask 20 questions.
What is the point?
Get to the point.
Just say it already.
Welcome to the Podcram. Check out what Tim Ferriss had to say on Chris Williamson's podcast, Modern Wisdom, episode 780. These are just my highlights. If you enjoy it, there's another 3 hours where this came from.
Talk to me about the difference between efficiency and effectiveness.
So effectiveness is, there are different ways to look at this. The way I look at it is effectiveness is what you do. Efficiency is how you do something. But doing something well does not make it important or high leverage. Does that make sense? So if you do an 80-20 analysis and you determine, say, in learning a language, that if you learn the 1,000 highest frequency words, you're going to be conversationally fluent, choosing that subset of vocabulary and then studying it at a B- level is better than choosing the wrong set of vocabulary and studying at an A+ level. So the what matters more than the how, or the material matters more than the method. The task that you choose matters more than how you do any given task. As long as you choose the highest leverage tasks, or as long as you have a system for choosing what is important, because that's going to be subjective, then over time, I think you can snowball your way into long-term success again, as you define it. Having those definitions for yourself is important. Otherwise, you're going to be flailing around or mimicking other people, and that can end up leading you in a lot of conflicting directions. If I'm looking at 5 possible projects or experiments, I tend to view them as experiments. So let's just say I'm looking at 6 possible projects / experiments that I could pursue in the next 3 to 6 months. Let's say 3 months. I really tend to focus in the short term, and it'll be clear why that works in the long term in a second. If I ask myself, which of these will help me to develop or deepen skills, develop or deepen relationships the most, even if they fail by external metrics, I bias towards choosing that project. And then even if it fails initially by whatever external metric you might have or perception of the public, as long as those skills and relationships transfer, they persist after that project, those will accumulate over time. And so far, my experience has been they lead to better success. I mean, if you look at, say, Jodorowsky's Dune, which failed, you have Geiger and all these incredible people involved, and then they split off and created these masterworks. And you see many examples like this. So I don't view the failure of any given project as a failure as long as there are things developed that can transfer forward into other things. So that's how I tend to choose my projects. The short-term experimentalism and the long-term planning are not mutually exclusive, but the long-term planning that I've seen executed really well is usually executed by people who are top 1% of 1% in a single field.
Yeah.
Whereas I don't have, as best I can tell, that degree of expertise. I'm more of a generalist. So
because
I would
they've
say
got this sort of linear progression through the...
Yeah, they have a superpower, right? They are a LeBron James. They are a superstar 10x coder. They are a fill in the blank. They have a very clearly identified superpower that can drive them through a pretty, I don't want to say linear path, but it allows them to plan with a higher degree of certainty how to take full advantage of that superpower. Whereas I think I am more of a generalist in the sense that I might be top 20% in a few things when you overlap them in a Venn diagram that allow me to try to, not always succeeding, be a category of one. So I'm attempting to be the only and not the best. It's a great book called The Blue Ocean Strategy that I recommend people read as you think about this. And there's also a chapter in a book called The 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing. It's a bit outdated in some ways, but the original version has examples of something they call the law of category, which is simply attempting to create new categories versus dominate crowded existing categories. And I think that's a helpful exercise, not just for branding and marketing purposes, but for positioning. And then when you think about positioning, you can work backwards from that and create the product. One of the principles I learned from Tony Robbins, and I don't know if the attribution is originally to Tony, but it's something that I've found very, very helpful, which is a progression. The progression is state, story, strategy. So if you are in a, say, low energy state or a negative state, you're going to create a disabling story, right? Or a critical or a cynical story, which will then impact in the sense that you come up with a subpar strategy. So I always start with state. And then you will have a more enabling story, which could just be from releasing some norepinephrine because you're freezing your balls off. Mm-hmm. And that will enable you to have a better strategy, at least for the day.
You've got an equivalent quote. I think it's easier to act your way into a new way of thinking than to think your way into a new way of acting.
Right. Personally, it's a matter of asking a lot of questions and doing some deep thinking and journaling about predominantly what gives me energy versus what takes energy from me, and doubling down on that. Life rewards the specific ask and punishes the vague wish.
Neil Strauss absolutely broke my brain last year where he said, unspoken expectations are premeditated resentments. What are the things that you do to pull yourself out of a funk? Or how would you advise people to better deal with depression and anxiety or low mood?
I really think an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure with this. So I try to prophylactically have routines in place that seem to decrease the likelihood. So let me build on that and say another piece of managing or mitigating or preventing low mood for me is having some identity diversification, which means you're not just doing one thing. If you have your podcast, your startup, your job as the sole barometer of your self-worth, there's so many factors outside of your control, or your investment portfolio, whatever it might be. If you were solely fixated on one thing, you're too vulnerable to black swan events or simply ups and downs due to variables that are outside of your control. So in contrast, if you have your Saturday workout, or you have your deadlift, you have rock climbing, you have archery, you have whatever it might be, in addition to your primary work, in addition to drawing, in addition to your relationship that you're trying to cultivate and deepen. If any one of those things is down, just like in a stock portfolio,
Correct.
If they are somewhat uncorrelated, you can still have a good week. If you have a terrible week, but then you hit a PR in your Saturday workout,
We did it, baby.
we did it.
Yeah.
Pass.
Yeah. You're hedging your identity. You're hedging your sort of existential investment.
Yeah, exactly. And that is very, very, very important to me, that I have multiple tracks running at the same time, so that if one hits a roadblock, that it's not just an existential spiral. What's important to note is that I have these things pre-scheduled. Right? I'm not waiting until I'm in a really acute space.
Which is the time when you are least likely to have the motivation to be able to book in a...
Right. If we come back to state, story, strategy, right? What's your state? Terrible, depressive, personalized, permanent. This is how could I be like this? I'm always like this. I'm never going to be able to fix this. So what's your story? It's not worth even trying. Should I even continue? ... You have this. So your strategy is going to be
dog shit
or non-existent.
Odd purchases, or purchases that I'm spending an inordinate amount of money on compared with what people think I should spend on it. For me, bed linen has become
Makes a difference.
Pet obsession. High quality bamboo bed linen, absolute game changer. You think about the quality of your mattress, you think about the type of pillow that you're using, all the rest of it, but the actual way that your skin interacts with your bed is directly through that. Bamboo cotton wipes the floor with high thread count normal cotton. It's easier than silk, and it doesn't make you feel like you're going to slide off the bed if something happens. For you, what are the things that you have found are worth spending more money on than most people would consider acceptable or sane?
I met this woman, my friend's mother, in Panama at one point, and I was complaining about, I think my heel was bothering me, and she said, invest in your shoes and your bed, because if you're not in one, you're going to be in the other. And I thought to myself, that's a smart woman right there.
Let's say that there's somebody listening who wants to dream bigger and wants to have more self-belief that they can make things happen in the world. What would you say to them?
Well, I would say first that, just like you, having done hundreds of these interviews with amazing people from all different walks of life, that the high performers are usually buckets of neuroses, just like everybody else, with some really serious insecurities that maybe they're aware of, maybe they're not, who have figured out how to capitalize on one or two strengths and have been able to create systems so that they can focus and leverage those things. You look at everything that's been built around us, the roads, the bridges, the highways, the skyscrapers, the Sistine Chapel, all made by humans, right? You know, the spectrum of accomplishment is really, really wide. So you don't need to be endowed with all these magical faculties to create these things. Secondly, I would say that paradoxically, it's often less crowded to aim for the home runs than it is to aim for the base hits, because so many people underestimate themselves that the base hits and the doubles are more crowded, just in terms of top of the bell curve, than aiming for the big. There's a warning, though, that I should add to that, which is it's very easy to hide behind the big. This is borrowed from Seth Godin. In other words, you can say, I want to change the world. Okay, great. But then on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis, what does that mean you're actually doing? What is your next physical action for that? And people can hide behind this big nebulous hand-wavy thing. Well, what's the antecedent to that? Maybe it's just finding product market fit and building a company that solves a problem with a product. Great. Okay. Let's back out of that. Now, what do you need to do? All right, I need an MVP of my website. Okay, great. Put it on some paper. Okay. Can you show that to somebody? Forget about building the website. Have your first contact with customers. Okay, great. Can you get them to pay you $1? If not, back to the drawing board. And I think that with the dreaming big, it's important to be able to back up. But A lot of it just comes down to trying a lot, doing 80-20 analysis to identify what the trivial many are and what the critical few are, being able to separate those two, double down on the critical few, understanding what your strengths are so that you can find something that is easier for you than it is for most people, right? Having a support system around you, like friends, then just play the game to the best of your ability and really try to be a category of one. It's a lot easier if you find the right arena to be the only instead of being the best, which does not mean you don't focus on quality. But if you don't think in terms of trying to create a new category for yourself, very often you end up in a red ocean type of scenario with a race to the bottom type of dynamic where it is incredibly difficult to create a career, an identity, a source of income that has a protective moat or margin for error of any type. So I would encourage people to deeply think about that as well. So that's a lot. But last and not least, I would say, if you're serious all the time, you're going to burn out before you get the truly serious stuff done. So don't take every day like it's a life or death thing. At the end, we're all dust. Like the empire builders, you listen to the fall of civilizations from these iconic empire builders. Like, you're not going to recognize any of the names. So if we get like all wound up about our podcasts or whatever, it's like, don't worry about it.
Yeah. No one's going to care in 50 years.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
We have this assumption, at least I always did, there is an asymmetry between what we see of our own mental vacillations and what we see of other people's motivations in the actions that they take. Everybody else looks like a slick, rational agent, and we look like a wavering idiot, right? Because all of the back and forth that somebody goes through doesn't show up in their actions. They just do the thing after all of that. But you see your own flaws and foibles from a front row seat. I think it's very easy to overestimate the competition and underestimate yourself.
Thanks for listening to this installment of The Podcram. I hope it contains something useful for you. If you enjoy these selections and are curious about the curator's own thoughts, you can check out my other podcast, Psychic Lube, where I share concise concepts meant to grease the intellectual gears and help get your creative juices flowing. Each episode is an ongoing collaborative project that welcomes listeners to expand or rebut its points by email or comment, the most interesting of which get incorporated through periodic re-recordings. As always, if you're intrigued by today's content, I encourage you to go listen to the full podcast in its original form directly from its creators so that their sponsors keep paying them to make stuff for us and nobody feels compelled to sue me for copyright infringement. Now, get off your phone and go do smart stuff. Have a productive day.